Believe it or not, another episode has been cleared for public release. And true, just barely, but cleared. So you'll recall that last season we talked about the pattern. Today, we're walking through how it actually breaks. Because your system doesn't fail all at once. It fails one file at a time. So today we're talking about that moment, the moment that your system stops being your system. And here's the part that nobody really thinks about. Your system doesn't just get evaluated all at once. It doesn't get judged as a whole. It doesn't even get tested fairly. It gets judged one single file at a time. And if that one file doesn't hold up, well, you don't really have a file problem that we think we do. What we actually have is you have a system problem. And most companies fail to make that leap from file to system until it's already too late.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Welcome back to the GovCon Show. A clearance is not required for this episode. Today's show is therapy for the overworked, the overregulated, and the underappreciated. This is not a lecture. It's not even a webinar. We're definitely not the NPR of government contracting, because this is the show where contracting professionals say the quiet part out loud. We break down the reality behind federal contracting, the pressure, the responsibility, the decisions that actually matter, and of course the absurdity that comes with all of that. So from bad scopes of work and rogue FAR clauses to CPSR panic attacks, and even those procurement files that don't tell the story, there is nothing off limits. Today we're kicking off season 2. Not by revisiting what we talked about last season, not by re-explaining what's broken. You already know that. Season 1 was about recognizing the problem and seeing the pattern in multiple issues. But season 2 is where we start showing you how it actually fails. So today we're walking through how a system actually breaks, because systems don't just dramatically collapse. They don't explode. They don't send you a warning email. They just slowly unravel, quietly, predictably, and most always starting in the exact same place. That one file. Let me paint a picture for you. You're going through your normal day. Nothing unusual, no panic attacks, no fires, no escalations. But you get a message. Hey, we're going to need a few files. That's it. No warning, no build-up, and your first reaction is, yeah, sure, no problem. Because in your mind, you're not thinking about risk. You're thinking, well, we've got everything. Emails, check. Quotes, check. Approvals, check. Attachments, check. Oh, yeah, we got plenty of attachments. You know, you're thinking, this is going to be easy. And that confidence, all that confidence, that's the setup. Because here's what happens next. They don't start with accusations. They don't come in and aggressively, they start very simply, right? Hey, walk me through your price analysis. That's it. That's the question. And if your brain immediately goes to, well, what we did was, well, then you're already in trouble, because Now you're explaining something that's not in the file, because that question is not asking you what you did. It's asking you, well, show me where it is in the file. And that point is where everything shifts. Because now we're no longer talking about what happened. We're talking about what you can prove. So you start explaining, you talk through it, you remember the situation, the urgency, you remember the trade-offs and the discussions that you had. And in your mind, it makes perfect sense. But the problem is, they're not inside your head. They're looking at the file. And the file is supposed to do one thing, to tell the story. Not hint at it, not suggest it, not imply there was discussions, but to tell the story. And most files don't. They simply don't. Oh, they contain pieces. They contain emails and the numbers, and they contain approvals and the spreadsheets. But nothing connects. There's no clear logic. There's no defensible reasoning. There's no narrative that stands on its own. And that's the moment the gap shows up, that gap between, well, it made sense at the time and it holds up under review. Because the gap between those two things, that's the moment the file stops helping you and starts hurting you. Now, I want to clear something up, because people get this wrong all the time. The person reviewing your file, they're not out to get you. They're not intentionally being difficult. They're not trying to make your life harder. They just weren't there. They're just not going to fill in the blanks for you. And that matters more than anything, because everything you're relying on, all the context, the conversations, the assumptions, all the understanding, they have none of that. They weren't part of any of that. So they default to the one thing, though, that they do have, which is the file and the documents in the file. What's in the file? That's all they have to go on. What's documented. And if it's not in a file, well, it's not a part of their decision. Now, I know everyone hates that line, but we've talked about it. You know, where is that? It was obvious. To who? We had the data. Well, great. Why is it in the file? That's how it goes every single time. And here's the part nobody prepares for. When your file doesn't tell the story, somebody else, the auditor, will. It's not based on what you meant, not based on what you know actually happened. That story they tell is only based on what they see. And what they see is gaps, inconsistency, missing logic, unclear decisions. And once that starts, you've lost control of the narrative. Now you're explaining your system. You're reacting to their interpretation of your system. And reacting, that's not a good place. Matter of fact, it's a very bad place to be, because it doesn't stop at one file. Oh, it never stops at one file. Never. No reviewer looks at a weak file and says, it's probably just one off. No. They say, well, hey, show me more like this one. Now they've got a sample. Now you've got a pattern. Now you've got exposure. And if you've ever had that moment where one question suddenly turns into 5 and things don't line up the way you expect, that's not random. That is exactly the kind of gap most companies don't see early. They see it as it happens. And that's exactly why I've built the CPSR Readiness diagnostic tool. You can find it over at govconadvisorygroup.com. It'll help you see how your system actually holds up when those questions start showing up. Because once those questions start, what happened next tells you everything about your system. And that's where companies get blindsided because they thought they had a documentation issue, or maybe a training issue, or maybe it was just a bad file. But in reality, what they actually have is a system that produces inconsistent results. And once that pattern is visible, it's not a file problem anymore. It's a system problem. Now, hear me on this one. I want to be as clear as possible because this is where people start getting uncomfortable. If your system only works when the right people are involved, or when the context is understood, or when nobody asks the hard questions, then your system isn't working. That is not a system. That's just a situation that hasn't really been tested yet. That's not a strategy. That's timing. And believe it or not, that timing runs out. Well, and now here's where most conversations go after all that. Well, we just need better documentation. No, that's lazy thinking. That's where people get it wrong. They think it's a documentation issue. It's not. Documentation is where the problem shows up, not where it started. The real issue is that your system is not designed to produce clear, defensible decisions. So your files don't either, because you don't have the systems your files can. So you don't fix that with a checklist. You don't fix it with a template or more training, especially the kind of training where everybody just sits around and nods and then goes back to doing the same old thing. The only way to fix that is by changing how decisions are made, how they're captured and explained, which is much harder than you realize. So let's reset the standard. A real procurement file is not a storage location. It's not a folder. It's not a place where documents just go to die. It's an argument. And that file should answer questions like, what decision was made? Why was it made? What options were considered? And why were those options rejected? The other question it's got to answer is if someone who wasn't there agreed with your outcomes. And if your file can't do that, then it doesn't matter how many documents are in there. It's weak. Because here's the reality. Your system is going to be tested. Oh, it will get tested. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow. But your system will get tested. And eventually, someone is going to ask the wrong question or pull the wrong file. They'll look a little closer than you expected. And when that happens, you don't get judged by what you meant. You don't get judged by what you knew or the situation that you remember. You don't get judged by what made sense to you at the time. You get judged by one thing, and that's the output of your system, what your system produces. And if what it produces doesn't explain your decisions, it doesn't show your logic, and it doesn't demonstrate consistency, someone else will define it for you. And once they do, you don't control the story anymore. That is your risk. That's just the reality. And that's how your system actually gets exposed. All right, guys, that's it. This is the GovCon Show, where government contracting professionals stop pretending and start seeing what's really out there. Now the question is simple. What are you going to do about it? If you're seeing cracks, if your system mostly works, or you're not sure whether it would hold up under real scrutiny, don't wait for someone else to find out. Fix it. Go to our website at govconadvisorygroup.com. That's where we come in. Real systems, real reviews, real fixings. You don't have to guess. You don't have to hold our hands. We'll teach you everything. We'll evaluate and teach you everything you need to know. Or if your team is still trying to figure it out and they're relying on old habits instead of new structure, maybe they don't know what's good actually looks like. Then learn it. Go to contractsclassroom.com, because training exposure is a whole lot cheaper than fixing it after the fact. Either way, don't sit in the middle. The middle is the zone of unnecessary risk. Don't play on the turf of risk. Pick you a lane. We'll see you in our next episode. And yeah, it was. This episode was cleared for public release, but just barely.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.